Sometimes the kindest hearts are found in the most broken people. Sometimes a stranger's compassion can change everything in a single day. In 1887, Moses Fairweather was a lonely cowboy living on the edge of Willow Creek. The war had taken his leg and his family. He spent his days carving wood and trying to forget. Then he found little Junebug hobbling down the road with a broken crutch. Without thinking, he carried her to his workshop and spent the whole day making her a wooden leg from old scraps. For the first time in months, Junebug smiled. But that same evening, a fancy black carriage rolled into town. Out stepped Junebug's mother, a wealthy woman who had been searching everywhere for her daughter after their stagecoach accident. What happens when two different worlds suddenly meet over one little girl? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Moses Fairweather's small homestead, 3 miles east of Willow Creek, where the prairie grass grew tall and the wind never seemed to rest. His cabin sat modest and square against the endless sky. Built from pine logs he'd cut himself and chinked with clay from the creek bed. A man could live simply here, and Moses had learned that simple was all he needed now. He sat on his front porch in the wooden chair he'd crafted 2 winters back. His left leg, the real one, stretched out comfortable while his right pant leg hung empty, pinned up neat at the knee. In his weathered hands he held his father's whittling knife, the bone handle worn smooth by 3 generations of Fairweather men. The blade moved with practiced precision through a piece of oak, shaping what would become a toy horse for some child in town whose parents might spare a few coins. The knife had belonged to his grandfather first, then his father, then to Moses himself when he'd left for the war 24 years ago. It was one of the few things that had come back with him from Gettysburg, along with a medal he kept in a drawer, and memories he tried not to keep at all. The knife connected him to better times, to the furniture shop his father had run in Ohio, to the smell of fresh sawdust, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his own hands. Moses had learned his craft at that workbench, standing on apple crates to reach the tools, listening to his father explain how wood had its own personality, its own grain and character that a man had to respect if he wanted to make something lasting. "Listen to what it wants to be," his father had said, guiding Moses's small hands around the handle of this same knife. "Don't force it. Work with it." Those lessons had served him well out here, where making do and mending broken things had become a way of life. His workshop, built onto the back of the cabin, held shelves lined with hand tools, each one cleaned and oiled and kept in its proper place. On the workbench sat his current projects, a chair leg that needed replacing for Mrs. Henderson in town, a wooden bowl he was carving just because the grain of the maple had caught his eye, and always, the small figures he carved in the evenings by lamplight. The figures told the story he couldn't speak aloud. A woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, a little girl with braids and a mischievous smile, a man with both his legs standing proud and whole. The family he'd once had, carved over and over in pine and oak and cherry wood, as if he could bring them back through the patient work of his hands. Mary had been waiting for him when he came back from the war. But the fever took her that first winter, along with their daughter Emma, just 5 years old and bright as a new penny. The house in Ohio had felt like a tomb after that, filled with too many memories and not enough life. So Moses had sold everything, bought a wagon and this piece of land, and come west to disappear. That had been 15 years ago, and Willow Creek had grown up around him, becoming less of a frontier town and more of a proper settlement with a school and a church and families putting down roots. Moses had watched it all from the edges, participating just enough to be neighborly, but keeping his distance from anything that might require him to care too much. His daily routine had become sacred in its simplicity. Rise before dawn, tend to his horse ranger and the few chickens he kept for eggs. checked the fence lines that marked his property, mending what needed mending with wire and wooden posts he cut himself. Returned to the workshop by mid-morning, when the light was best for detailed work. Carve until his stomach demanded lunch, then carve some more until the sun began its descent toward the horizon. 3 times a week, he'd load his wagon with whatever pieces he'd finished and make the trip into town, selling his work to whoever needed it and buying supplies with the coins he earned. The townspeople treated him with respectful distance, appreciating his craftsmanship, but understanding that Moses Fairweather was a man who valued his solitude. Doc Patterson was the exception, the only soul in Willow Creek who'd earned the right to be called a friend. Patterson had treated Moses's war wounds when he'd first arrived, had sat with him through the dark nights when phantom pain from his missing leg kept sleep at bay, and had never once asked questions that Moses wasn't ready to answer. "You're healing," Patterson had told him just last month, during one of their weekly chess games in the doctor's office. "Not just the body that mended years ago. I mean the rest of you. A man can see it in how you sit, how you talk about your work. You're not just surviving anymore, Moses. You're starting to live again." Moses hadn't known how to respond to that observation, so he'd moved his bishop and changed the subject to the weather. But Patterson's words had stayed with him, rattling around in his mind like seeds in a gourd. Maybe there was truth in them. Maybe the tight band of grief that had squeezed his chest for so many years was finally beginning to loosen its grip. The memory box sat on his bedside table, holding the few precious things he'd saved from his old life. Mary's wedding ring on its delicate chain, Emma's favorite hair ribbon, still smelling faintly of the lavender soap she'd loved. A photograph of the 3 of them, taken just before he'd left for the war, when the world had seemed full of promise and possibility. Some evenings, when the loneliness pressed too hard against his ribs, Moses would open that box and hold these treasures, remembering what it felt like to be loved, to be needed, to be part of something larger than his own solitary existence. But more often now, he found himself looking forward instead of backward, planning new projects for his workshop, thinking about improvements he could make to the cabin or the land. The countryside around his homestead had become as familiar as his own hands. He knew where the best wild berries grew, which creek beds held the straightest willow branches for his work, where the deer came to drink in the early morning hours. This was his world now, bounded by fence lines and measured in the rhythm of seasons. And most days it felt like enough, but sometimes, sitting on his porch with his father's knife in his hands and the endless prairie stretching out before him, Moses wondered if God might have other plans for him. If maybe the healing Doc Patterson had noticed was preparation for something he couldn't yet see, some purpose he hadn't yet discovered. The morning breeze carried the scent of rain from the western sky, and Moses could feel the change coming in his bones, the way his missing leg ached before weather turned. Something was shifting in the air around Willow Creek, like the moment before lightning strikes when everything goes still and electric with possibility. Moses set down his knife and looked out at the dusty road that connected his property to the town, wondering what kind of travelers it might bring his way. The child appeared on the road like a mirage, wavering in the heat shimmer that rose from the sun-baked earth. Moses first spotted her from his workshop window, a small figure moving slowly along the dusty track that led from town to his homestead. He set down the chair leg he'd been sanding and stepped outside. Shading his eyes against the morning glare, she couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, dressed in what had once been a fine blue dress, but was now torn and stained with dust and mud. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face, and she moved with the painful, uneven gait of someone favoring an injury. In her right hand, she clutched the broken pieces of what had been a makeshift crutch. Moses felt his chest tighten with recognition and concern. He'd learned to read the signs of desperation in his own dark days, and this child wore them like a second skin. Without conscious thought, he moved toward her, his own uneven steps covering the ground between them faster than seemed possible. "Easy there, little one," he called softly when he was still 20 feet away. The girl's head snapped up, and Moses saw eyes the color of summer sky, wide with exhaustion and weariness. She took a step backward, clutching her broken crutch tighter. "I ain't done nothing wrong, mister," she said, her voice carrying traces of education that didn't match her current bedraggled state. "I'm just passing through, heading to town." Moses stopped where he was and slowly lowered himself to sit on a nearby fence post, making himself less imposing. "I can see that," he said gently. "But that crutch of yours looks like it's seen better days. Might I ask what happened to it?" The girl's lower lip trembled slightly before she caught it between her teeth. "It broke this morning when I was trying to cross the creek back there. I made it myself from a tree branch, but I guess I didn't do it right." "Made it yourself?" Moses kept his voice calm and curious, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "That shows considerable resourcefulness. How long have you been traveling?" 3 days, maybe 4. The girl swayed slightly on her feet, and Moses noticed the way she was favoring her left leg, holding it at an odd angle. "Lost count, really. Been walking since the accident." "What kind of accident?" Tears began to track down her dirty cheeks, leaving clean streaks through the grime. "Stagecoach turned over in a storm. I got thrown clear, but my leg got all twisted up. Mama was still inside when it went over the edge into the ravine. I tried to get down to help her, but the rocks were too steep and my leg wouldn't work right." Moses felt his heart clench with familiar pain. He'd seen enough battlefield injuries and their aftermath to understand what this child had endured. "How did you get away from the accident site?" "Walked. Crawled some at first, until I found that branch to lean on. Took me 2 days just to get back up to the road." She wiped her nose with the back of her free hand. "Been looking for help ever since, but ain't seen nobody until now." "And your mama? Did anyone else survive the crash?" The girl's face crumpled. "Don't know. Couldn't see down into the ravine good enough, and I couldn't climb down with my leg like this. Been hoping she got out somehow, that maybe she's looking for me too." Moses stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "What's your name, child?" "Junebug," she said without hesitation. "At least that's what Mama calls me. My real name's too fancy for everyday use." "Well, Junebug, my name's Moses Fairweather, and I live just over there in that cabin. Now I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to think about it careful before you answer. You can come rest a spell, get something to eat and drink, and let me take a look at that leg of yours. Or you can keep walking toward town, though I should mention it's still got another 5 miles to go." Junebug looked down the road toward Willow Creek, then back at Moses. Her small body was trembling with exhaustion, and Moses could see the war between desperation and caution playing out across her features. "You ain't gonna hurt me?" she asked quietly. "No, child. I give you my word on that." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I reckon I could use some help. My leg's been paining me something fierce." Moses approached her slowly and knelt down beside her. "May I take a look?" When she nodded, he gently examined her left leg through the torn fabric of her dress. He could feel the swelling around her ankle and the unnatural angle of her foot. Not broken, but badly sprained, and possibly with torn ligaments that hadn't healed properly. "I'm going to carry you to the cabin," he said. "Is that all right?" "I ain't no baby," Junebug protested weakly. "No, you're not. You're a brave young lady who's been through more than most grown folks could handle. But sometimes even the bravest people need help, and there's no shame in accepting it." He lifted her as gently as he could, feeling how light she was, how her small body trembled with fatigue and pain. She smelled of dust and fear and something else, something that reminded him of his own daughter's hair after she'd been playing in the garden. "You said your real name was Too Fancy," Moses said as he carried her toward the cabin. "Would you mind sharing it with me?" "June Isabel," she whispered against his shoulder. "But Junebug's better, makes me feel more like myself." Moses settled her in his most comfortable chair and brought her water first, then milk, and the last of the bread he'd baked 2 days ago. She ate slowly but steadily, and Moses watched color begin to return to her pale cheeks. "Now then," he said, pulling his workshop stool closer to her chair, "about that leg of yours. I've got some experience with injuries like that, and with making things that might help. Would you be willing to let me see what I can do?" Junebug nodded, and Moses spent the next few minutes examining her ankle more thoroughly. The original injury had been severe, and walking on it for days had prevented proper healing. She would always have some limitation in that leg, he realized, but with the right support, she could move around just fine. "I have an idea," he said, standing and moving toward his workshop. "But it's going to take me most of the day to make it right. Think you could rest here while I work?" "What kind of idea?" Moses turned back to her with a gentle smile. "Trust me?" Junebug looked around the simple, clean cabin, at the careful way everything was arranged and maintained, at the kindness in this stranger's eyes, and something inside her chest began to loosen for the first time in days. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I think I can do that." Moses nodded and disappeared into his workshop, where he spent the next several hours selecting the finest pieces of oak and leather he could find, crafting with more care and attention than he'd given to any project in years. And for the first time since Mary and Emma had died, he found himself humming while he worked. The wooden leg fit like it had been crafted by angels. Junebug stood in Moses's workshop 3 days later, taking her first tentative steps with the prosthetic he'd created for her. The device was a work of art, carved from seasoned oak and padded with soft leather, designed to distribute her weight evenly and move naturally with her gait. Moses had spent hours studying how she moved, how she balanced, creating something that worked with her body rather than against it. "It don't hurt," she said with wonder, taking another careful step around the workshop. "First time in days that walking don't hurt." Moses watched from his workbench, pretending to focus on sharpening his tools while keeping a careful eye on her movements. "The padding needs to settle in for a few more days, but the fit looks good. How does the balance feel? Like I got my real leg back." Junebug turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears that had nothing to do with pain. "Why'd you do this for me? You don't even know me." The question hit Moses harder than he'd expected. Why had he spent 3 days crafting a prosthetic for a child he'd found on the road? Why had he opened his home to her, shared his food, given her his daughter's old nightgown to sleep in? "Everyone deserves to walk without pain," he said simply. "And everyone deserves kindness when they're hurting." Over the following days, they developed routines that felt surprisingly natural. Junebug proved to be an eager student, fascinated by the tools and techniques of woodworking. Moses found himself teaching her to hold a chisel properly, to read the grain of wood, to understand how different pieces of timber had different personalities and purposes. "This maple here," he said, holding up a piece of raw lumber, "it's got a sweet grain that's perfect for bowls and spoons. But this oak," he lifted a darker, heavier piece. "Oak's got backbone. You use oak when you need something that's going to last and hold weight." Junebug ran her small fingers along both pieces, feeling the difference in texture and density. "Like people?" she asked. "Some folks are maple sweet and some are oak strong," Moses smiled. "That's exactly right, and the best things are made when you use each kind of wood for what it does best." In the evenings, they sat on the front porch while Moses carved his small figures and Junebug practiced her letters in the dirt with a stick. Her education had been interrupted by the accident, but Moses could see she'd been well taught before that. Her vocabulary was sophisticated, her curiosity keen, and she picked up new concepts with remarkable speed. "Where did you live before the accident?" Moses asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the prairie. "Denver," Junebug said, not looking up from the cat she was trying to draw in the dirt. "Big house with lots of rooms and servants and such. Mama said it was important for a lady to have proper surroundings. Did you like it there?" Junebug considered this carefully. The house was pretty enough, I suppose, but it was awful quiet. Mama was always busy with her social obligations, and the servants weren't supposed to talk to me much, except to mind my manners and such. I spent most of my time in the library reading books. Moses felt a familiar pang of recognition. His own Emma had been a reader, always curled up in some corner with a book in her hands. "What kind of books did you like?" "Adventure stories, mostly. Tales about people going places and doing things that mattered." She looked up at Moses with serious eyes. "Do you think my mom is still alive?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a campfire. Moses had been dreading it, knowing it would come eventually, but hoping he'd have better answers by the time it did. "I think," he said carefully, "that if your mama is alive, she's looking for you. And if she's not, then you're safe here with me for as long as you need to be." Junebug nodded solemnly. "I've been thinking about that too. Part of me hopes she's alive and looking, but part of me—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Part of you what?" "Part of me hopes she ain't found me yet, because I like it here. I like learning to make things with my hands, and I like how you explain stuff without making me feel stupid. And I like how quiet it is here, but not the lonely kind of quiet." Moses felt his chest tighten with emotions he'd thought he'd buried with his own family. "You're not stupid, Junebug. You're one of the smartest children I've ever met. Smart enough to stay here." The hope in her voice nearly broke his heart. Moses set down his carving and looked at her seriously. "What happens here isn't up to me alone, child. If your mama is alive and looking for you, then she has the right to find you. And if she's not, well, there are legal considerations about taking care of someone else's child." "What kind of legal considerations?" Moses explained as gently as he could about guardianship laws, about how the authorities would want to make sure any child was being properly cared for by appropriate people. He told her about Sheriff Hartwell, who was a good man, but would have questions that needed answering. "So even if Mama don't come back, you might not get to keep me." "I don't know, Junebug. But I promise you this, whatever happens, I'll make sure you're safe and cared for." "That's not a promise I make lightly." As the days passed, Moses began to understand how dangerous this situation was becoming, not for Junebug, but for his own heart. He found himself looking forward to her chatter during their morning chores, to her questions about his work, to the way she hummed tunelessly while helping him organize his tools. She filled spaces in his life he hadn't realized were empty, brought laughter into corners that had been silent for years. In his workshop one afternoon, as Junebug carefully sanded a piece of pine under his supervision, Moses began carving something new, a wooden doll with braided hair and a smile like sunshine. It was meant to be a gift for her, something to comfort her when the nightmares came, as they still did some nights. But as he worked, he realized he was carving more than just a toy. He was carving hope and possibility, and the dangerous dream that maybe, just maybe, he might have a chance to be a father again. The memory box came out on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after Junebug's arrival, when the summer thunderstorms rolled across the prairie and filled the cabin with the sound of rain drumming against the windows. Moses had noticed her restlessness as the storm approached, the way she moved from window to window, watching the lightning flash in the distance. When the first rumble of thunder shook the walls, she'd curled up in the big chair with her arms wrapped around her knees, her face pale with remembered terror. "It was storming the night of the accident," she said quietly, when Moses asked if she was all right. "Every time I hear thunder now, I think about Mama trapped in that coach, calling for help while the water rises." Moses understood nightmares and the way trauma could turn ordinary things into triggers. He'd lived with his own ghosts long enough to recognize them in someone else. Without saying anything, he went to his bedroom and returned with the small wooden box he kept beside his bed. "I want to show you something," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "But first, I need to tell you a story I ain't told to nobody in 15 years. Junebug looked at the box in his hands, then up at his face. Something in his expression told her this was important. Sacred ground they were entering together. "I had a family once," Moses began, his voice steady but soft. "A wife named Mary, who could make bread that tasted like heaven, and a little girl named Emma, who was about your age when she passed. They died of fever the winter after I came back from the war, and for a long time after that, I thought my life was over too." He opened the box carefully, revealing its precious contents. Mary's wedding ring caught the lamplight, still beautiful after all these years. Emma's hair ribbon lay folded neatly beside a small carved horse Moses had made for her 6th birthday. And underneath it all, the photograph of the 3 of them, taken in happier times when the world had seemed full of promise. "This is all I got left of them," Moses said, lifting the photograph so Junebug could see it clearly. Sometimes, when the loneliness gets too heavy, I take these things out and remember what it felt like to be part of a family. Junebug studied the photograph with solemn attention. Your little girl was pretty, she said softly. She looks like she was happy. She was. Both of them were. And for 6 wonderful years, so was I. Moses traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb. After they died, I thought I was done with happiness. Thought maybe I wasn't meant to have people to love, that caring about folks just meant setting myself up for more heartbreak. But you took care of me anyway. I did. And you know what I learned? Moses looked at Junebug directly, his eyes kind but serious. I learned that love ain't something you can use up. Mary and Emma taught me how to love, how to be patient and gentle and protective. All that learning don't just disappear when the people who taught it to you are gone. It stays with you, ready to be used again when the right person comes along. Junebug reached out tentatively and touched the edge of the photograph. Do you think they'd mind? But you taking care of me, I mean. Moses smiled, feeling a weight he'd carried for years begin to lift from his shoulders. I think they'd be proud. Mary always said the best way to honor the dead was to keep living, keep loving, keep doing good in the world. And Emma, his voice caught slightly, Emma always wanted a little sister. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain and watching the lightning flash outside. Finally, Junebug spoke again. I miss my mama something fierce, she said. But I ain't never had anyone talk to me the way you do, like what I think and feel matters. Back in Denver, I was mostly just something pretty to dress up for company, something to prove that Mama was a proper lady raising a proper daughter. Every child matters, Moses said firmly. Every thought in that head of yours, every question you ask, everything you learn, it all matters. Don't let nobody ever tell you different. Over the following days, something shifted between them. The tentative politeness gave way to genuine affection. The careful boundaries dissolved into natural intimacy. Moses began teaching Junebug to read, using Mary's old Bible and the few children's books he'd kept from Emma's collection. She proved to be a quick student, sounding out words with determination and asking thoughtful questions about the stories. Why did Moses in the Bible get to lead all them people to the promised land? She asked one afternoon as they worked on a reading lesson. Seems like a big responsibility for one person. Sometimes God picks folks for jobs they don't think they're ready for, Moses replied. Maybe the trick is trusting that if you're called to do something, you'll be given what you need to do it right. Like how you knew how to make my leg work. Maybe so. But practical concerns began to intrude on their peaceful existence. Junebug needed proper clothes, shoes that fit her prosthetic, school supplies if she was going to continue her education. Moses realized he would need to make official inquiries about guardianship, would need to involve Sheriff Hartwell and probably the circuit judge who came through Willow Creek once a month. The trip to town for supplies became an event that drew attention. Folks noticed Moses buying fabric and children's shoes, saw Junebug walking confidently beside him on her wooden leg, observed the easy affection between the gruff cowboy and the articulate little girl. That's a fine piece of work, commented Harold Jensen, the town's general store owner, nodding toward Junebug's prosthetic. Heard you made it yourself. I did, Moses replied, keeping his voice neutral but proud. Child's lucky to have found someone with your skills. Not many men would take on such a responsibility. Moses felt Junebug's small hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently. Reckon we're both lucky, he said simply. But he could feel the weight of curious stares, hear the whispered conversations that followed them down the street. Willow Creek was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Moses Fairweather suddenly caring for a mysterious child was the kind of news that spread fast and generated plenty of speculation. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Junebug asked the question Moses had been dreading. What happens if someone comes looking for me? What happens if they don't think you should be the one taking care of me? Moses looked out at the vast prairie, thinking about promises and responsibility and the dangerous hope that had taken root in his heart. Then we'll face that when it comes, he said quietly. Together. The guilt came in waves, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, when Moses lay awake, listening to Junebug's peaceful breathing from the small bed he'd set up in the corner of the main room. How could he be so happy when Mary and Emma were gone? How could another child's laughter fill the spaces in his heart that had belonged to his daughter? He'd taken to wearing Mary's wedding ring on a chain around his neck, the gold warm against his chest, a constant reminder of promises made and love lost. But lately, the weight of it felt different, less like an anchor dragging him down, and more like a compass pointing him towards something he couldn't yet name. Junebug noticed everything, as children do, and she'd begun asking gentle questions about the chain that sometimes caught the lamplight when Moses leaned over his work. "Is that something special?" she asked one morning as they worked together repairing the church pews that had been damaged in the last storm. Reverend Matthews had commissioned the work, and Moses was grateful for the project that allowed him to teach Junebug more advanced woodworking skills while earning enough to support them both. Moses's hand went automatically to his chest, feeling the ring's outline beneath his shirt. "It was my wife's wedding ring. I wear it to remember her, the lady in the photograph." "That's right." Junebug continued sanding the pew's surface with careful even strokes, the motion Moses had taught her to keep the wood smooth and ready for staining. "Do you think she'd mind that you're taking care of me?" The question stopped Moses mid-motion, his plane hovering over the wood he'd been smoothing. It was the same question that had been haunting his own thoughts, the worry that had been eating at him during those pre-dawn hours of doubt. "Why do you ask that?" "Sometimes at night, when you think I'm sleeping, I hear you talking to someone. Figured it might be her you were talking to, asking her what she thought about things." Moses set down his plane and looked at this perceptive child who saw too much and understood even more. "What makes you think I need her permission?" "Because you loved her, and love makes you want to do right by people, even when they ain't here anymore." Junebug looked up from her sanding, her eyes serious and wise beyond her years. "I talk to my papa sometimes too, even though he died when I was little. Tell him about things that happen, ask him what he thinks I should do, and what does he tell you? Same thing your Mary probably tells you, that love don't get smaller when you share it. It gets bigger." The wisdom in those words hit Moses like a physical blow, gentle but profound. Here was this child who had lost as much as he had, teaching him about the mathematics of the heart. He sat down heavily on the church pew they'd been repairing, suddenly feeling the weight of 15 years of self-imposed isolation. "I've been scared," he admitted. "Scared of caring too much about you, because losing the people you love hurts something terrible. But also scared that caring about you means I'm somehow being disloyal to Mary and Emma." Junebug set down her sandpaper and moved to sit beside him on the pew. "Want to know what I think?" "I surely do. I think Mary and Emma sent me to you. Think maybe they've been watching you be sad and lonely for all these years, and they figured it was time to send you someone to take care of. Someone who needed taking care of just as much as you needed to do the taking care of." Moses felt tears prick at his eyes, the first he'd shed since the day he'd buried his family. "You really believe that?" "I do. Because the day I found you, I was praying to my papa to send me someone kind, someone who wouldn't hurt me or send me away. And there you were, sitting on your porch like you were waiting for me." That afternoon, as they continued their work on the church pews, Moses began to share more stories about Mary and Emma, weaving them into the day's conversation like threads in a tapestry. He told Junebug about Mary's terrible cooking experiments and her beautiful singing voice, about Emma's fear of thunderstorms and her collection of smooth river rocks. "Emma would have liked you," he said, as they applied stain to the repaired wood. "She always wanted someone to teach things to, someone to look after. Mary used to say Emma had the heart of a big sister, even though she was an only child. I always wanted a papa," Junebug said quietly. "My real papa died in a mining accident when I was 3, so I don't remember much about him, except that he used to sing to me at bedtime. Mama never remarried, said no man could measure up to Papa's memory. Sounds like he was a good man." "I think so. Mama kept his picture on her dressing table." And sometimes I'd catch her talking to it, telling him about her day or asking him for advice about raising me proper. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the smell of wood stain filling the air around them. Finally, Moses spoke again. "Junebug, I want you to know something important. Whatever happens, whether your mama comes back or whether we figure out some other arrangement, you'll always have a place in my heart. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Purpose, hope, the feeling that tomorrow might hold something good." That evening, Reverend Matthews stopped by to check on their progress with the pews and stayed for supper. Moses watched nervously as the minister observed their domestic routines, noting how Junebug helped with cooking and cleaning, how she said grace with genuine reverence, how she and Moses moved around each other with the easy familiarity of family. "You've done remarkable work with the child," Matthews said quietly as they sat on the porch after Junebug had gone to bed. "She's clearly thriving under your care. She's a special girl. Smart as a whip and twice as determined. Have you given thought to making the arrangement more permanent? There are legal procedures, of course, but given the circumstances and your obvious devotion to the child, I believe the community would support a formal guardianship petition." Moses felt his heart leap and sink simultaneously. "There's still the matter of her mother. If the woman's alive, she has the right to her daughter, of course. But if she's not, or if she can't be found after a reasonable search, then Junebug deserves a permanent home with someone who loves her. And you, my friend, deserve the chance to be the father you've proven yourself to be." After Matthews left, Moses sat alone on his porch, feeling the weight of possibility settling around his shoulders like a comfortable coat. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that stretched beyond mere survival, a future filled with purpose and love and the daily joys of watching a child grow into adulthood. Inside the cabin, Junebug stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like Papa Moses, and his heart swelled with fierce protectiveness and tentative hope. The silver locket revealed itself on a Tuesday morning in late August, when Moses was carefully mending the tears in Junebug's blue dress, the same dress she'd been wearing when he found her on the road 6 weeks ago. They'd acquired newer, better-fitting clothes during their trips to town, but Junebug had asked him to repair the original dress anyway, saying it was the last thing her mama had put on her before the accident. As Moses worked by the window where the light was best, his fingers encountered something hard, sewn into the dress's inner seam. He paused, feeling the small oval shape through the fabric, then looked over at Junebug, who was practicing her letters at the kitchen table. "Junebug, come here a moment. I think there's something hidden in your dress." She set down her pencil and joined him by the window, watching as he carefully opened the seam with his smallest knife. Inside, wrapped in a piece of silk, was a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. "I'd forgotten about that," Junebug whispered, her eyes wide with memory. "Mama sewed it in there the morning we left Denver, said it would be safer hidden than worn, where folks could see it." Moses handed her the locket carefully, watching as she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with Junebug's same distinctive eyes and dark hair, but arranged in elaborate curls and wearing clothes that spoke of considerable wealth and social position. "That's her," Junebug said softly, tracing the tiny painted face with her fingertip. "That's my mama." Moses studied the portrait, feeling his stomach sink as he began to understand the full scope of what keeping Junebug would mean. This was not the wife of a shopkeeper or farmer, not someone who would quietly disappear without extensive searching. This was clearly a woman of substance, probably with connections and resources that could reach far beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek. "She's beautiful," he said truthfully. "You have her eyes. Mama always said I was the image of her when she was little, except for my stubborn streak. She said that came from Papa's side of the family." Junebug closed the locket carefully and held it against her chest. "Do you think she's really gone?" The question hung between them like smoke from a campfire, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to face. Moses had been hoping, selfishly, that Junebug's mother was indeed dead, that the accident had claimed her and left Junebug free to stay with him permanently. But looking at the portrait, seeing the obvious care and expense that had gone into commissioning such a detailed miniature, he began to realize how unlikely that scenario really was. "Tell me about her," he said, settling into the chair beside Junebug. "What was she like?" Junebug fingered the locket chain thoughtfully. "Different from you. Not bad different, just different. She cared a lot about how things looked, about doing things the proper way. Our house in Denver was like a museum, beautiful but not really comfortable. Mama said it was important to maintain standards, to show people that we belonged in polite society. Did you belong there? Feel like you fit in?" "Not really. The other children weren't allowed to play with me much because their parents thought I was too forward, too curious about things that weren't my concern. Mama tried to teach me to be more ladylike, to sit quiet and speak only when spoken to, but I never could manage it for long." Moses smiled, thinking of the spirited child who asked him dozens of questions every day, who attacked new woodworking projects with fearless enthusiasm, who had opinions about everything from the weather to the best way to stack firewood. What about before the accident? "Where were you traveling to?" "We were going to visit Mama's sister in California, and Priscilla had written that the sea air might be good for my constitution since I'd been sickly that winter. Mama thought a change of scenery might help me learn to be more settled, more appropriate for a young lady of my station." Moses felt a chill of understanding. "Your station?" Junebug looked uncomfortable. "The Montgomery family has money, Papa Moses. Lots of money. Mama inherited it all when her first husband died, and she's been very careful to make sure it stays in the family. She used to tell me that I had responsibilities because of my inheritance, duties to live up to the family name." Montgomery. Moses repeated the name, feeling its weight and significance. He'd heard talk in town about mining fortunes and railroad money, about families whose wealth stretched back to the gold rush days. If Junebug was one of those Montgomerys, then her disappearance wouldn't go unnoticed or uninvestigated. "How much money are we talking about, child?" "I don't rightly know the exact amount, but our house in Denver took up a whole city block, and Mama employed 12 servants just to keep it running proper. She always said we could afford anything we needed and most things we wanted, so long as it was respectable and appropriate." Moses felt the walls of his simple cabin closing in around him. How could a one-legged cowboy with a modest homestead compete with that kind of wealth and social position? What judge would award custody to him when Junebug's rightful inheritance included mansions and servants and all the advantages money could buy? "Papa Moses." Junebug's voice was small and worried. "You look sad. Are you thinking that maybe Mama will come for me?" Moses forced himself to meet her eyes. "I'm thinking that if your Mama is alive, she's probably moving heaven and earth to find you. A woman with those kinds of resources doesn't just disappear without people noticing. And she doesn't stop looking for her daughter just because it's hard or takes time. But I don't want to go back." The words burst out of Junebug with desperate intensity. "I know that makes me ungrateful and probably sinful, but I don't want to go back to being dressed up like a doll and told to sit still and be decorative. I want to stay here with you and learn to make things and be useful." Moses pulled her close, feeling her small body tremble with emotion. "I want that too, more than you know. But wanting something and being able to have it are two different things." They spent the afternoon working on their latest project together, an elaborate dollhouse that Moses had begun as a way to teach Junebug advanced joinery techniques. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were creating a miniature mansion, complete with tiny furniture and multiple rooms. While discussing the real mansion she'd left behind, "Tell me about the house in Denver," Moses said, as they fitted tiny baseboards into the dollhouse parlor. "What did your room look like?" "Big," Junebug said immediately. "Bigger than your whole cabin. I had a 4-poster bed with pink curtains and a dressing table with a mirror that had gold all around the edges and a wardrobe full of dresses I never really liked wearing. There was a balcony that looked out over the garden, where Mama grew roses and held tea parties for the other ladies." "It sounds beautiful." It was. But it was also lonely. I wasn't allowed to touch most of the things in the house because they were too valuable or too fragile. And I couldn't run or make noise or ask too many questions because it wasn't ladylike. She looked up from the tiny window she was installing. Do you think I'm ungrateful for preferring it here? I think you're honest about what makes you happy. That's not ungrateful, that's brave. But even as he spoke the words, Moses felt the weight of impending loss settling over him like storm clouds. Because somewhere out there, he was becoming increasingly certain Vivian Montgomery was indeed alive and searching for her daughter. A woman with that kind of wealth would have hired investigators, would have posted rewards, would have used every resource at her disposal to track down her missing child. As evening approached, Moses stood at his window watching the road that led to town, and for the first time since Junebug's arrival, he found himself dreading the sight of travelers in the distance. Papa Moses. Junebug appeared at his elbow, the locket now hanging openly around her neck. Whatever happens, you'll always be my real papa, won't you? In my heart, I mean. Moses knelt down to her level and took her small hands in his weathered ones. Always, Junebug. No matter what happens, no matter where you go or who takes care of you, you'll always be my daughter in the ways that matter most. Promise? I promise. But as they settled into their evening routine, Moses couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful existence was balanced on the edge of a knife, and that any day now the weight of the outside world would come crashing down upon them. That night, as he lay awake listening to the sounds of the prairie, Moses thought he heard something new carried on the wind, the distant sound of horses and carriage wheels, still far off but growing closer. The black carriage arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early September, rolling down the dusty road toward Moses's homestead like something from another world. The vehicle was elegant and expensive, pulled by 4 matching bay horses and driven by a man in formal livery who looked distinctly uncomfortable in the frontier heat. Moses saw it coming from his workshop window and felt his heart sink into his boots. Beside him, Junebug looked up from the wooden toy she'd been sanding and followed his gaze to the approaching carriage. "Is that—" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I believe it is," Moses said quietly. He set down his tools and moved to the cabin door, Junebug close behind him, her hand slipping automatically into his for comfort. The carriage stopped in front of the cabin, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and a woman stepped out who was unmistakably the original of the portrait in Junebug's locket. Vivian Montgomery was perhaps 35 years old, dressed in traveling clothes that probably cost more than Moses made in a year. Her dark hair was perfectly arranged, despite the long journey, and her bearing spoke of money and education and social position. But it was her eyes that stopped Moses cold, the same summer sky blue as Junebug's, now filled with desperate hope and barely contained emotion. "June Isabel?" she called, her voice breaking slightly on the name. "Mama!" Junebug broke away from Moses and ran across the yard, her wooden leg moving smoothly beneath her. Mother and daughter collided in an embrace that was fierce and tearful and beautiful to watch. Moses stood in his doorway, feeling like an intruder on their reunion, but unable to look away. This was what he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure, proof that Junebug's mother was alive, that his time as her protector was coming to an end. "My darling girl," Mrs. Montgomery was saying, her hands moving over Junebug's face and hair as if to assure herself that this was real. "I've been searching everywhere for you. When the coach went over the edge and I couldn't find you, I thought—" Her voice broke completely. "I'm all right, Mama. Papa Moses took care of me, fixed my leg and everything." Mrs. Montgomery's eyes lifted to Moses for the first time, and he saw her take in his appearance, the worn clothes, the wooden leg, the simple homestead behind him. Her expression was unreadable, a careful mask of politeness that didn't quite hide her uncertainty about what she was seeing. "You must be Mr. Fairweather," she said, approaching him with Junebug still clinging to her hand. "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for caring for my daughter." "No need for gratitude, ma'am. Any decent person would have done the same." She looked down at Junebug's wooden leg, noting how naturally the child moved with it, how well crafted and fitted it was. "Did you make this?" "I did." Her ankle was badly injured in the accident, needed support to heal properly. "It's remarkable work." Mrs. Montgomery's voice held genuine admiration. "June, show me how well you can walk." Junebug demonstrated proudly, walking back and forth across the yard with confidence and grace. "Papa Moses taught me woodworking too, Mama. I can sand and measure and even do some carving. Look." She ran to the workshop and returned with the toy horse she'd been working on. Holding it up for her mother's inspection, Mrs. Montgomery examined the piece carefully, and Moses saw surprise flicker across her features. "This is very fine work, darling. You've learned a great deal. Mr. Fairweather," she continued, turning back to Moses, "I wonder if we might speak privately. There are arrangements to be made, and I would like to understand exactly what has transpired here." Moses nodded, though his chest felt tight with apprehension. "Junebug, why don't you show your mother the cabin while I put away the tools? Then we can all sit down and talk." As Junebug led her mother inside, chattering excitedly about the daily routine she'd established, Moses took a few moments to compose himself. This was it then, the end of the happiest 2 months he'd known since Mary and Emma died. He would say goodbye to Junebug, watch her climb into that expensive carriage, and return to his solitary existence. When he joined them inside, Mrs. Montgomery was examining the simple but clean interior with careful attention. She noted the small bed in the corner where Junebug slept, the books Moses had been using to teach her to read, the wooden doll he'd carved for her sitting on the windowsill. "June tells me you've been teaching her to read and write as well as woodworking," she said as they settled. Around the kitchen table, "She's a quick learner, bright as a new penny and twice as determined, and you've asked for no payment, made no demands." Moses felt a flush of irritation. "She's a child who needed help. I don't charge children for kindness." Something in his tone made Mrs. Montgomery look at him more closely. "Forgive me, Mr. Fairweather. I meant no offense. It's just that in my experience, when something seems too good to be true, there's usually a hidden cost. The only cost has been to my own heart," Moses said quietly. "I've grown fond of the child. Saying goodbye ain't going to be easy." Mrs. Montgomery reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Before we discuss arrangements, there's something I need to show you. Something that may change the nature of our conversation entirely." She opened the portfolio and removed several official-looking documents, spreading them on the table where Moses could see them. At the top was a military commendation, and Moses's blood ran cold as he read his own name on the faded parchment. "Do you recognize this?" Mrs. Montgomery asked softly. Moses stared at the document, memories flooding back unbidden. Gettysburg, July 1863. The smell of gunpowder and blood, the screams of wounded men, the chaos of battle that had cost him his leg and nearly his life. "Where did you get this?" "My late husband's effects. Captain Robert Montgomery, 2nd Colorado Infantry. According to his letters home, you saved his life during the battle, carried him to safety despite your own wounds." Moses closed his eyes, remembering. A young officer trapped under his fallen horse, Confederate forces advancing. The choice between saving himself and helping a stranger. He'd made his decision without thinking, hauled the injured captain to safety moments before enemy fire swept the position. He died 6 months later at Chickamauga. Mrs. Montgomery continued, her voice soft with old grief. "But he wrote to me about that day at Gettysburg, about the cowboy with the gentle hands who risked his life for a stranger. He said he owed you his life, and that debt passed to me when he died." Moses looked up at her, seeing tears in her eyes that matched the ones threatening his own. "I don't understand. Mr. Fairweather, Moses, you saved my husband's life, which gave me 6 more precious months with him before the war took him away permanently. And now, 15 years later, you've saved my daughter's life and given her something I never could. What's that? The chance to be herself, to learn and grow and discover what she's capable of without the constraints of social expectations." Mrs. Montgomery reached across the table and took his hand. June has told me about her life here, about the things you've taught her, about how happy she's been. And I can see it in her, a confidence and joy that she never had in Denver. Moses felt the ground shifting beneath him, as if the very foundations of his understanding were being rearranged. "I still don't understand what you're getting at, Mom." Mrs. Montgomery smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, the careful mask slipped away to reveal genuine warmth. "I'm getting at the possibility that perhaps we don't have to choose between June's two families. Perhaps there's a way for her to have both." The three of them spent the next 2 days in careful negotiation, each conversation revealing new layers of complexity and possibility. Mrs. Montgomery, Vivian, as she insisted Moses call her, had taken rooms at the boarding house in town, but returned to the homestead each morning to continue their discussions and observe the life Moses and Junebug had built together. Moses watched her closely during those visits, seeing how she studied their routines with the sharp intelligence of a woman accustomed to making important decisions. She observed Junebug's woodworking lessons, listened to her read aloud from Mary's old Bible, and witnessed the easy affection between them that spoke of genuine family bonds rather than mere temporary arrangement. "You've given her something precious," Vivian said on the second evening as they sat on the porch, watching Junebug chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I've never seen her so confident, so comfortable in her own skin. She's a remarkable child. Any fool could see that." "Not any fool, Moses. I've spent 8 years trying to shape her into something she wasn't meant to be, trying to force her into the mold of a proper Denver society lady. I thought I was protecting her, preparing her for the life her inheritance would require. But watching her here—" Vivian paused, her voice thick with emotion. "Watching her here, I realize I was trying to dim her light instead of helping it shine brighter." Moses carved quietly as they talked, his hands busy with the final details of the music box he'd been crafting for Junebug. It was his masterpiece, carved from the finest cherry wood he could find, with intricate mechanisms that would play the lullaby he'd heard Junebug humming during her first week with him. Originally intended as a farewell gift, it had become something more, a symbol of the unconditional love he would always carry for this child. "Regardless of where life took her, tell me about your idea," Moses said quietly. "This arrangement you're proposing." Vivian leaned forward in her chair, her eyes bright with possibilities she was still working through. "I've been thinking about what June truly needs, not just what society expects of her. She needs education, certainly, and exposure to the wider world. But she also needs this." She gestured toward the simple homestead, the workshop, the sense of belonging that radiated from every corner of the property. "She needs you, Moses. She needs the confidence and skills and love you've given her. But she's your daughter, Vivian, and she's got an inheritance that requires certain the inheritance will wait. It's been managed by trustees for years. It can continue to be managed until she's old enough to decide for herself what she wants to do with it." Vivian stood and began pacing the length of the porch. "What if we split our time? What if June spent part of each year here with you, learning woodworking and practical skills and how to be herself, and part of each year in Denver with me, getting formal education and cultural exposure?" Moses felt his heart leap with hope, even as his practical mind raised objections. "That's a generous thought, but there are legal considerations. Guardianship laws, custody arrangements. A judge would have to approve any such plan, then we'll make it legal. I'll petition the court to name you as co-guardian with shared custody rights. My lawyers tell me that given the circumstances, your care of June after the accident, your obvious devotion to her welfare, and my own recognition of your suitability, such an arrangement is certainly possible. Your lawyers?" Vivian smiled ruefully. "I've had investigators searching for June since the day after the accident. When they finally tracked her to Willow Creek last week, I had them research you thoroughly before I made the trip. I know about your war service, your late wife and daughter, your reputation in town as an honest, skilled craftsman. I know you're exactly the kind of man I would want raising my daughter, if I had the wisdom to choose such things myself. Moses set down his carving tools and looked at her directly. Why would you want to share her? You could take her back to Denver right now, give her every advantage money can buy. Why complicate things with arrangements and shared custody? Because I love her enough to want what's best for her, not just what's easiest for me. Vivian's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. I lost my husband to war, Moses. I know what it's like to have love ripped away without warning. But I also know what it's like to make choices based on fear instead of hope, to try to control everything because you're afraid of losing what matters most. She sat back down, her hands folded in her lap. For 8 years, I've been trying to protect June by limiting her world, by keeping her safe in a beautiful cage where nothing could hurt her. But you've shown her that there's another way to live, with courage and purpose and the freedom to become whoever she's meant to be. Junebug appeared on the porch then, breathless from her chase and glowing with happiness. Papa Moses, look what I caught. She held up a mason jar containing several fireflies, their gentle light flickering in the gathering darkness. That's mighty fine, little one. But don't you think they'd be happier flying free? Junebug considered this seriously, then unscrewed the jar's lid and released the fireflies back into the night. There, now they can go wherever they want to go. Moses and Vivian exchanged a meaningful look over the child's head, both understanding the metaphor that had just played out before them. Junebug, Moses said carefully, your mama and I have been talking about what happens next, about where you'll live and how we'll all stay connected. How would you feel about spending part of your time here with me and part of your time in Denver with your mama? Junebug's eyes grew wide with possibility. You mean I wouldn't have to choose? I could have both families. That's what we're hoping to arrange, Vivian said softly. If it's what you want. It's what I want more than anything. Junebug threw her arms around Moses first, then her mother, then tried to hug them both simultaneously. I was so scared I'd have to leave Papa Moses forever, or that I'd never see you again. Mama, this is like having all my prayers answered at once. But even as they celebrated this tentative solution, Moses felt the weight of practical considerations pressing down on him. There would be legal procedures to navigate, social expectations to manage, and the constant challenge of bridging two very different worlds. Would he be able to fit into Junebug's Denver life when the time came for visits? Would Vivian truly be comfortable leaving her daughter in the care of a simple cowboy for months at a time? There's something else, Vivian said the next morning as they worked together in Moses's shop, watching Junebug put the finishing touches on her wooden toy. I've been thinking about my own situation, about the life I've built in Denver. Moses looked up from the music box, hearing something new in her voice. What about it? It's empty, Moses, beautiful and respectable and utterly empty. I have a mansion full of expensive things and a social calendar full of meaningless obligations, but I don't have what you and June have here. What's that? Purpose, connection, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with your own hands. She gestured toward the workshop, with its tools and projects and evidence of productive work. I've been thinking that perhaps this arrangement could benefit all of us. Perhaps I could spend part of my time here as well, learning what you've taught June about finding fulfillment in simple, honest work. Moses felt his breath catch. The idea of Vivian Montgomery, with her elegance and education and social position, choosing to spend time in his simple world, seemed impossible. But looking at her face, he saw genuine longing there, the same hunger for authentic connection that had driven him to care for Junebug in the first place. You're serious about this. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I want to be the kind of mother June deserves, the kind of person my husband would be proud of. And I hope, that starts with learning to value the things that truly matter. That evening, Moses presented Junebug with the completed music box, watching her face light up as the delicate melody filled the air between them. The lullaby was one she'd hummed during her first frightened nights in his cabin, a tune her father had sung to her years ago that had somehow stayed with her through all the changes and losses. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she whispered, tracing the intricate carvings with reverent fingers. "You made this for me?" "I made it because I love you," Moses said simply. "And no matter what happens, no matter where you go or how your life changes, you'll always have this to remind you that you're loved unconditionally." Junebug set the music box carefully on the table and threw her arms around Moses's neck. "I love you too, Papa Moses, more than all the words in all the books in the world." As they prepared for bed that night, Moses felt a cautious optimism settling over him like a comfortable blanket. Perhaps this impossible thing they were attempting, this blending of worlds and sharing of love, might actually work. Perhaps there really was a way for all of them to have what they needed without losing what they'd already found. The train tickets lay on Moses's kitchen table like small rectangles of possibility and heartbreak. 2 first-class tickets from Willow Creek to Denver, departing the following morning. Vivienne had produced them from her traveling bag with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making complex arrangements quickly. "I know we've talked about sharing custody," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "but I think it's important for June to see her inheritance, to understand what she'll be taking on as she gets older. A few weeks in Denver, just to help her remember who she is in that world." Moses stared at the tickets, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came with impending loss. "A few weeks," she said. "But what if Junebug got back to Denver and remembered all the advantages that wealth could provide? What if the sophisticated life of the city made his simple homestead seem primitive and small by comparison?" "A few weeks," he repeated quietly, "that's all. I promise, Moses, we'll be back before the first snow." But Junebug, who had been unusually quiet during this conversation, suddenly stood up from her chair with an expression of fierce determination that reminded Moses powerfully of her mother. "No," she said clearly, "I'm not going." Vivian blinked in surprise. "Darling, what do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not going back to Denver. Not now, not in a few weeks, not ever." Junebug's voice was shaking but steady. "I don't want to see the big house or remember being a lady or learn about my inheritance. I want to stay here with Papa Moses, where I can be myself." "June, sweetheart, you don't understand." "I understand plenty." The words burst out of Junebug with years of suppressed frustration. "I understand that you want me to be something I'm not, something I never wanted to be. I understand that you think being rich and proper is more important than being happy. But I also understand that Papa Moses loves me exactly the way I am, and I'm not leaving him." Moses felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. This fierce little girl was choosing him, choosing the life they'd built together over all the advantages her mother could provide. But he also saw the pain in Vivian's eyes, the fear that she was losing her daughter all over again. "Junebug," he said gently, kneeling down to her level, "your mama's not trying to take you away from me. She's trying to make sure you understand all your choices before you decide what kind of life you want. I already know what kind of life I want. I want this one." Vivian stood abruptly and walked to the window, her shoulders rigid with emotion. "She's right, Moses. I'm trying to take her back to something she never wanted in the first place. I've been telling myself it was about giving her choices, but really it was about my own fear of letting go." She turned back to face them, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I lost my husband to war and nearly lost my daughter to an accident, and my response has been to try to control everything, to lock her away in a beautiful prison where nothing bad could ever happen to her again." "Mama," Junebug said softly, her anger dissolving into sympathy. "But you were never meant for a prison, were you, darling? You were meant for this, for adventure and learning, and the freedom to become whoever you're supposed to be." Vivian sat back down and took Junebug's hands in hers. "I see that now. I see what Moses has given you that I never could." "What's that?" Junebug asked. "The chance to grow, the chance to fail and try again and discover your own strength. I've been so afraid of losing you that I never let you really live." Moses watched this exchange with growing understanding of the courage it was taking for Vivian to acknowledge her mistakes, to put her daughter's needs ahead of her own fears. It reminded him of his own journey over the past months, learning to love without trying to control, to give without expecting anything in return. "What if we tried something different?" he suggested quietly. "What if instead of Junebug going to Denver, Denver came here? What if you stayed for a while, Vivienne? Really stayed, not just visited?" Vivienne looked at him in surprise. "You mean live here, in Willow Creek?" "Why not? You said yourself that your life in Denver felt empty. Maybe it's time to try something new, something that feeds your soul instead of just maintaining your social position. But my responsibilities, my business interests, can be managed from anywhere there's a telegraph office. And Willow Creek's got plenty of room for someone with your education and abilities. The school could use a teacher with your background, or you could start a business of your own." Junebug's eyes were shining with hope. "Would you really do that, Mama? Would you really stay here with us?" Vivienne looked around the simple cabin, at the evidence of the life Moses and Junebug had built together, at the possibility of becoming part of something real and meaningful instead of just maintaining. The partnership agreement was drawn up by Judge Harrison when he made his monthly circuit through Willow Creek the following week. The document was unprecedented in his 30 years of legal practice, a formal arrangement that recognized Moses as Junebug's legal guardian while maintaining Vivienne's parental rights and establishing their shared responsibility for the child's welfare. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Judge Harrison admitted as they gathered in the small courthouse above the general store. "But given the unusual circumstances and the obvious benefit to the child, I see no legal obstacle to approving such an arrangement." The judge was a tall, serious man with kind eyes who had taken the time to interview Junebug privately before making his decision. She had impressed him with her intelligence and clear preference for her current living situation, and her obvious affection for both Moses and her mother. He'd also spoken with Doc Patterson, Reverend Matthews, and several other townspeople, all of whom testified to Moses's character and the remarkable transformation they'd witnessed in both him and the child. "Mr. Fairweather," Judge Harrison continued, "the court has reviewed your military service record, your reputation in this community, and your demonstrated care for Miss Montgomery. While this arrangement is unusual, it's clear that you've provided exceptional guardianship under extraordinary circumstances." Moses felt his throat tighten with emotion. After so many years of living on the margins of society, to have his worth as a guardian officially recognized felt like a gift he'd never expected to receive. "The child's welfare is clearly being served," the judge said, reviewing the documents one final time. "Mr. Fairweather, you'll be recognized as Miss Montgomery's legal guardian with full authority to make decisions about her education, medical care, and daily welfare. Mrs. Montgomery, you retain all parental rights and will share in major decisions affecting your daughter's future and the financial arrangements." Vivienne asked, her voice steady, but Moses could see the slight tremor in her hands. "Miss Montgomery's inheritance will remain in trust until her 18th birthday, managed by the existing trustees in Denver. However, we're adding a provision that Mr. Fairweather may access reasonable funds for her care and education as needed. Any major expenditures will require approval from both guardians." Judge Harrison set down his pen and looked at them seriously. "I want to be clear about something. This arrangement is being approved because it serves the best interests of the child. But it will be reviewed annually to ensure that continues to be the case. Any concerns about Miss Montgomery's welfare or education will result in immediate court intervention." "We understand, Your Honor," Moses said quietly. "Junebug's happiness and well-being will always come first. I believe that, Mr. Fairweather. And Mrs. Montgomery, your willingness to adapt your own life to serve your daughter's needs speaks well of your character as a mother." Moses felt overwhelmed by the formality of it all, the legal language that was making official what had already become true in his heart. But he also felt profound gratitude that the law was willing to recognize the unconventional family they were creating. "There's one more matter," Judge Harrison said, looking over his spectacles at Vivienne. Mrs. Montgomery, I understand you're planning to relocate to Willow Creek permanently. I am, Your Honor. I've already begun making arrangements to sell my property in Denver and establish residency here. Vivian's voice grew stronger as she spoke about her plans. I've come to realize that a life lived solely for social position is a life wasted. I want to build something meaningful here, something that will benefit not just my daughter, but this entire community. And your plans for supporting yourself? Vivian straightened in her chair with the confidence of a woman who had made peace with her decision. I've spoken with the school board about establishing an advanced curriculum for older students. Willow Creek has been growing rapidly, and there's a need for education beyond what the current schoolmaster can provide. I have credentials from the Denver Female Seminary and experience tutoring young ladies in literature, mathematics, and natural sciences. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Moreover, I'm planning to establish a small business importing quality goods from Denver and beyond, things that frontier families need but can't easily obtain locally. Books, tools, medical supplies, luxury items for special occasions. I've already identified suppliers and established credit arrangements. Willow Creek is becoming prosperous enough to support such a venture. Judge Harrison made notes as she spoke. You've given this considerable thought. I have, Your Honor. This isn't a whim or an escape. It's a conscious choice to build a life that has meaning beyond mere comfort or social standing. Moses listened to her plans with growing admiration and something else, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with genuine affection for this remarkable woman who was choosing substance over appearance, love over convenience. Very well, Judge Harrison said, signing the final documents with a flourish. I hereby grant joint guardianship of June Isabel Montgomery to Moses Fairweather and Vivian Montgomery, with the arrangements detailed in these documents. The court recognizes this as a unique but appropriate solution to unique circumstances. He looked directly at Junebug, who had been sitting quietly between Moses and her mother throughout the proceedings. Miss Montgomery, this decision affects your life more than anyone else's. How do you feel about this arrangement? Junebug stood up slowly, her wooden leg carrying her with the confidence Moses had helped her build over the past months. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, I feel like the luckiest girl in the whole world. Most children only get one family, but I get to keep both of mine. Papa Moses taught me that I don't have to be ashamed of being different. And Mama taught me that it's important to use whatever gifts you have to help other people. Together, they're teaching me how to be the person I'm supposed to be. She paused, looking back and forth between Moses and Vivian. I know this arrangement is unusual, but so am I, and I think maybe unusual families are perfect for unusual children. Judge Harrison smiled, the first time his stern expression had softened during the entire proceeding. Well said, young lady. I believe this court has made the right decision. The paperwork complete, they walked out of the courthouse into the bright September sunshine, officially a family in the eyes of the law. Word of their arrangement had spread through Willow Creek, and Moses was touched to see several townspeople waiting to congratulate them. The gathering felt like an impromptu celebration, with handshakes and embraces and words of support that made Moses's eyes sting with grateful tears. Doc Patterson clapped Moses on the shoulder with obvious approval. About time you had family around you again, my friend. That little girl has brought out the best in you, and you've given her something precious in return. What's that? Moses asked. The knowledge that she's valuable exactly as she is. That's a gift that will serve her well for the rest of her life. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house embraced Vivian warmly. Welcome to our community, dear. We're so pleased to have someone of your education and refinement joining us. The children will benefit tremendously from your teaching, and frankly, some of us adults could use the cultural elevation as well. Vivian laughed, the sound lighter and more genuine than Moses had ever heard from her. I think you'll find that I have as much to learn from this community as I have to offer it. Reverend Matthews offered his blessing and invited them to a celebration dinner at the church the following Sunday. where the whole community could officially welcome their new arrangement. "God works in mysterious ways," he said with a gentle smile. "But sometimes his plans are more beautiful than anything we could have imagined for ourselves." Sheriff Hartwell, who had been quietly supportive throughout the legal process, shook Moses's hand with genuine warmth. "I'll be honest, Moses. When I first heard about this situation, I had my concerns. But watching the three of you together, seeing how you've all grown and changed, it's clear that this is how it was meant to be." As they walked back toward Moses's homestead, their homestead now, Junebug skipped between her two guardians, chattering excitedly about plans for the future. She wanted to show her mother all her favorite places around the property, teach her about the different types of wood in Moses's workshop, help her understand why this simple life was so much better than the complicated one they'd left behind. "We should expand the cabin," she said breathlessly as ideas tumbled out of her. "Mama needs a proper room, and maybe we could build a bigger workshop where all three of us can work together. And we'll need space for the books Mama's going to order for the school, and maybe a proper parlor where she can receive parents who want to discuss their children's education." Moses and Vivian exchanged amused glances over her head. "Slow down there, little architect," Moses said with a chuckle. "We've got plenty of time to make all those improvements. But I want Mama to be comfortable here. I want her to love it as much as I do." "I already do, darling," Vivian said softly. "I love it because it's where you're happy. And because it's where I'm learning what really matters in life." As they reached the edge of Moses's property, Vivian stopped and looked back toward the town. "You know," she said quietly to Moses as they watched Junebug chase a butterfly through the tall grass, "I never expected to find what I was really looking for when I came here to retrieve my daughter." "What's that?" "A sense of purpose. A reason to get up in the morning that has nothing to do with social obligations or maintaining appearances." She smiled at him with genuine warmth. "A family that chooses each other, rather than one that's bound only by law or blood." Moses felt his own smile spreading across his face as he realized that for the first time in 15 years, he was completely, genuinely happy. But more than that, he was hopeful. Hopeful about tomorrow, about the life they were building together, about the possibility that the best chapters of his story were still waiting to be written. 6 months later, the photographer from Denver finished arranging them on the front porch of Moses's expanded cabin for their family portrait. Vivian had insisted on commissioning the formal photograph, wanting to capture this moment when their unconventional family had found its rhythm and settled into something that felt both natural and permanent. The expansion of the homestead had been a community effort that reflected how thoroughly Moses, Vivian, and Junebug had been embraced by Willow Creek. Harold Jensen had donated lumber at cost. Doc Patterson had helped with the architectural planning. And nearly every able-bodied man in town had contributed labor during the barn-raising style construction that had added 3 new rooms to the original cabin. Moses sat in the center of the photograph, wearing his best shirt and a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The man who had once lived in bitter solitude now radiated the quiet contentment of someone who had found his purpose and his place in the world. To his right, Vivienne looked elegant but relaxed in a practical dress she'd made herself, her hands no longer soft from idleness, but strengthened by honest work. Her transformation from pampered society widow to essential community member had been remarkable to witness. She'd thrown herself into teaching and business with the same passion she'd once reserved for social obligations, and between them, Junebug fairly glowed with happiness, her wooden leg hidden beneath her skirts, but her confidence visible in every line of her posture. At 13 now, she was becoming a young woman of remarkable capability and grace, comfortable in her own skin in a way that spoke to the healing that had taken place for all of them. "Hold still now," the photographer called from beneath his black cloth. "This will be just a moment more." As they waited for the flash, Moses reflected on how much had changed since that autumn day when Vivian's carriage had first rolled down his dusty road. The cabin had been expanded with 4 additional rooms, a proper bedroom for Vivian, a study where she could prepare her lessons and manage her import business, a larger workshop where all three of them could work together on various projects, and a guest room for the visitors who now came regularly to see their unconventional but successful arrangement. The workshop had become the heart of their shared enterprise. Moses's reputation for fine craftsmanship had spread throughout the territory, aided by Vivian's connections and business acumen. They now employed 3 apprentices from town and regularly filled orders for furniture and decorative pieces from as far away as Denver and San Francisco. But more than a business, the workshop had become a place where the 3 of them connected daily, sharing stories and solving problems while their hands shaped wood into useful and beautiful objects. Vivian had indeed proven surprisingly adept at woodworking, though she claimed her talents lay more in the design and business aspects of their growing enterprise. She had a natural eye for proportion and detail that complemented Moses's technical skills, and her education had allowed her to research and implement new techniques and finishing methods that elevated the quality of their work. Junebug had become their most skilled carver, with a delicate touch and artistic sensibility that amazed everyone who saw her work. The wooden leg that had initially been a necessity had become in many ways an asset. The challenges it presented had developed her patience and precision in ways that made her exceptionally good at detailed work. "Perfect," the photographer announced, and the magnesium flash filled the air with its brief, brilliant light. "That should make a beautiful portrait." As they relaxed from their formal poses, Moses watched Junebug hop down from the porch to examine the photographer's equipment with her characteristic curiosity. She was asking intelligent questions about the chemical processes involved in photography, already thinking about how such techniques might be applied to their own work. "She's becoming quite the scholar," the photographer observed, clearly impressed by her questions. "Your daughter has an exceptional mind." "Both my daughters do," Moses said, smiling at Vivian. The comment was more significant than the photographer could know. Just 2 weeks earlier, Moses had finally found the courage to ask Vivian to marry him, and she had accepted with tears of joy. Their engagement had surprised no one in Willow Creek. The entire community had watched their partnership deepen over the months, from mere cooperation into genuine affection and mutual respect. But Moses had needed time to work through his feelings about Mary and Emma, to understand that loving again didn't diminish his previous love, but rather honored it by proving that the capacity for love Mary had nurtured in him was still alive and growing. "Have you set a date for the wedding?" the photographer asked, apparently having heard the news during his stay in town. "Spring," Vivian said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "We want to wait until the new schoolhouse is finished and my replacement teacher arrives from Denver. And Junebug insists on carving all the decorative elements for the church ceremony herself." Speaking of which, Junebug called from where she was still examining the camera equipment. "Mr. Henderson wants to know if his jewelry box is ready for his wife's birthday. He's been asking Papa Moses about it every day this week." Moses chuckled. "Tell him it'll be ready tomorrow." "Your mother's doing the final inlay work tonight." The jewelry box was one of their collaborative pieces. Moses had done the structural work. Vivian had designed the interior compartments, and Junebug had carved the delicate rose pattern that decorated the lid. It was the kind of project that showcased all their skills while creating something that would be treasured for generations. "She's thriving," Vivian said softly, following Moses's gaze as they watched Junebug engage the photographer in detailed conversation about the chemical processes of his craft. "I made the right choice, bringing her here, bringing myself here. We all made the right choice," Moses corrected gently. "It wasn't easy and it wasn't conventional, but it was right." Vivian's transformation had been as remarkable as anyone's. Her school for advanced students had become so successful that families from neighboring towns sent their children to board during the school year, just to benefit from her instruction. She taught literature and mathematics and natural sciences with a passion that made learning irresistible. And she'd also started offering evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading and writing skills. Her import business had flourished as well, bringing quality goods and educational materials to the growing frontier community. But she'd found ways to use her wealth and connections that went far beyond mere commerce. She'd funded the expansion of the town school, established a proper library, and helped several struggling families get back on their feet during hard times. "You know," she said now, her voice carrying a note of something Moses couldn't quite identify, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." "What's that?" She turned to face him fully, her expression serious but warm. They'd grown comfortable with each other over the months of living and working together, their relationship deepening beyond mere cooperation into something that felt like genuine partnership in every sense of the word. "We've been partners in raising Junebug, partners in business, partners in building this life together. I was wondering if you might be interested in making the partnership more complete." Moses felt his breath catch as he understood what she was suggesting. They had officially announced their engagement, but they hadn't yet talked about the deeper implications of joining their lives so thoroughly. "Are you asking about more than just marriage, Vivian Montgomery?" he asked with a gentle smile. "I suppose I am. I'm asking about forever, Moses. About building something that will last beyond just the three of us, something that will benefit this community for generations to come." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about establishing a formal school here, not just classes, but a real institution of learning, and expanding our workshop into a proper furniture manufactory that could employ dozens of people. Creating something permanent and meaningful." Moses took her hands in his weathered ones, feeling the calluses she'd earned through honest work, seeing the vision in her eyes that matched his own dreams for what their life together could become. "I love that idea," he said simply. "I love everything about the future you're describing. But most of all, I love that you want to build it with me. And I love you, Moses Fairweather. I love your kindness and your patience, and the way you see the best in everyone around you. I love the life we've built together, and the man you've helped me become. Papa Moses, Mama!" Junebug's voice called from across the yard, where she'd been showing the photographer her latest woodworking project. "Come see what Mr. Henderson thinks of my jewelry box." They joined her by the workshop, where the photographer was indeed admiring the intricate piece Junebug had crafted as her contribution to the collaborative project. Delicate rose carvings that seemed to grow naturally from the wood itself, with detail work that rivaled anything Moses could have produced. "This is remarkable work for someone so young," the photographer said. "You've clearly inherited exceptional talent." "Both my fathers taught me well," Junebug said proudly, looking from Moses to a spot in the workshop where a small portrait of her deceased father sat among Moses's tools. "My first papa taught me to be brave and curious, and Papa Moses taught me to make things that last and to never be ashamed of being different." "And your mother?" the photographer asked. "Mama taught me that having advantages means you have responsibilities to help other people, and that the most important thing you can do with your life is make it meaningful." Junebug's face grew serious. "We're building something here that's bigger than just our family. We're showing people that families can be made in lots of different ways, and that love is stronger than anything that tries to separate people who belong together." As the photographer finished packing up his equipment and prepared to return to Denver, Moses stood with his arms around both Vivian and Junebug, looking out over the land that had become so much more than just his refuge from the world. It had become the foundation for something he'd never thought possible, a second chance at love, at family, at the kind of happiness that grows stronger rather than dimmer with time. The memory box still sat on his bedside table, but he no longer opened it with sorrow. Mary's ring hung on its chain around his neck, not as a reminder of loss, but as a blessing on the new love he'd found. Emma's hair ribbon was carefully preserved, but now it shared space with Junebug's school certificates and Vivienne's pressed flowers from their garden. The past and present had woven themselves together into something beautiful and strong. like the grain of fine wood that grew more lovely with age and care. The cabin that had once housed only memories and regret now rang with laughter and purposeful activity. The workshop that had been Moses's solitary refuge had become a place where three different perspectives combined to create beauty and utility in equal measure. Their success had rippled outward through the community in ways Moses was still discovering. Young people who might have left Willow Creek for opportunities in larger cities were now staying to learn trades and build lives in their hometown. Families were moving to the area specifically because of the educational opportunities Vivian had created. The town was prospering in ways that went far beyond mere economic growth. It was becoming the kind of place where people could build meaningful lives and strong communities. That evening, as they sat on their expanded porch, watching the stars come out over the prairie, Moses reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The war that had taken his leg and scattered his life had also taught him about resilience and the value of helping others. The grief that had driven him to isolation had also prepared him to recognize and respond to suffering in others. Even his loneliness had served a purpose, creating space in his heart for the love that now filled his days with joy and purpose. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Junebug that day?" he asked Vivian as they watched their daughter practice her reading by lamplight inside the cabin. "I think you would have found each other eventually," Vivian said thoughtfully. "I think some connections are meant to be, and the universe has ways of bringing the right people together when they're ready for each other." Moses nodded, thinking about all the seemingly random events that had led to this moment. If Junebug's stagecoach hadn't crashed, if she hadn't walked down his particular road, if Vivienne hadn't survived to search for her daughter, if any of a dozen small decisions had been made differently, none of this would have happened, but it had happened. And Moses had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as the most challenging circumstances. Sometimes the people who needed rescuing were the ones doing the rescuing. Sometimes families were built not through blood or law, but through the simple decision to choose each other again and again, despite all the reasons why it might not work. The wooden leg that had brought them together still carried Junebug gracefully through her days, but it was no longer a symbol of limitation. It had become instead a reminder that with the right support, the right love, and the right family, there was no dream too big to chase, no challenge too great to overcome, and no future too bright to embrace with both hands and an open heart. As the night deepened around them, and the sounds of the prairie settled into their familiar rhythm, Moses Fairweather knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the family he was meant to have. Some broken things, he'd learned, could be mended into something even stronger than they'd been before. Some second chances were worth waiting half a lifetime to find. And sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones that chose each other rather than simply accepting what fate had given them. The story that had begun with an act of simple kindness toward a stranger had grown into something larger and more lasting than Moses could ever have imagined. And the best part was knowing that this was just the beginning, that there were still years of growth and love and shared purpose ahead of them. Years of watching Junebug become the remarkable woman she was meant to be. Years of building something that would last long after they were gone. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, carrying other travelers toward their own uncertain destinations. But Moses no longer felt the urge to wonder where those tracks might lead. He had found his destination, had built his home, had discovered his purpose. And as he looked at the two most important people in his world, he knew that all the wandering and searching and heartbreak had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this place, with this family that had chosen each other and would keep choosing each other for all the days to come. With sorrow, Mary's ring hung on its chain around his neck, not as a reminder of loss, but as a blessing on the new love he'd found. Emma's hair ribbon was carefully preserved, but now it shared space with Junebug's school certificates and Vivian's pressed flowers from their garden. The past and present had woven themselves together into something beautiful and strong, like the grain of fine wood that grew more lovely with age and care. The cabin that had once housed only memories and regret now rang with laughter and purposeful activity. The workshop that had been Moses's solitary refuge had become a place where three different perspectives combined to create beauty and utility in equal measure. Their success had rippled outward through the community in ways Moses was still discovering. Young people who might have left Willow Creek for opportunities in larger cities were now staying to learn trades and build lives in their hometown. Families were moving to the area specifically because of the educational opportunities Vivian had created. The town was prospering in ways that went far beyond mere economic growth. It was becoming the kind of place where people could build meaningful lives and strong communities. That evening, as they sat on their expanded porch, watching the stars come out over the prairie, Moses reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The war that had taken his leg and scattered his life had also taught him about resilience and the value of helping others. The grief that had driven him to isolation had also prepared him to recognize and respond to suffering in others. Even his loneliness had served a purpose, creating space in his heart for the love that now filled his days with joy and purpose. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Junebug that day?" he asked Vivienne as they watched their daughter practice her reading by lamplight inside the cabin. "I think you would have found each other eventually," Vivienne said thoughtfully. "I think some connections are meant to be, and the universe has ways of bringing the right people together when they're ready for each other." Moses nodded, thinking about all the seemingly random events that had led to this moment. If Junebug's stagecoach hadn't crashed, if she hadn't walked down his particular road, if Vivian hadn't survived to search for her daughter, if any of a dozen small decisions had been made differently, none of this would have happened, but it had happened. And Moses had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as the most challenging circumstances. Sometimes the people who needed rescuing were the ones doing the rescuing. Sometimes families were built not through blood or law, but through the simple decision to choose each other, again and again. Despite all the reasons why it might not work, the wooden leg that had brought them together still carried Junebug gracefully through her days. But it was no longer a symbol of limitation. It had become instead a reminder that with the right support, the right love, and the right family, there was no dream too big to chase, no challenge too great to overcome, and no future too bright to embrace with both hands and an open heart. As the night deepened around them, and the sounds of the prairie settled into their familiar rhythm, Moses Fairweather knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the family he was meant to have. Some broken things, he'd learned, could be mended into something even stronger than they'd been before. Some second chances were worth waiting half a lifetime to find. And sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones that chose each other rather than simply accepting what fate had given them. The story that had begun with an act of simple kindness toward a stranger had grown into something larger and more lasting than Moses could ever have imagined. And the best part was knowing that this was just the beginning, that there were still years of growth and love and shared purpose ahead of them. Years of watching Junebug become the remarkable woman she was meant to be. Years of building something that would last long after they were gone. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, carrying other travelers toward their own uncertain destinations. But Moses no longer felt the urge to wonder where those tracks might lead. He had found his destination, had built his home, had discovered his purpose. And as he looked at the two most important people in his world, he knew that all the wandering and searching and heartbreak had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this place, with this family that had chosen each other and would keep choosing each other for all the days to come.